You think being exploited by your own blood is the worst thing that can happen? You are dead wrong. The absolute worst is when they use the word family to justify stealing everything you have bled for over the past 10 years, wearing a smug smile. Brace yourself. This is a suffocating psychological chess match where blind enabling created a monster, and my retaliation was a fatal strike they never saw coming. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Vivian Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with no budget to operate. But if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and keep creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code right on the screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. My name is Peyton Knight. I am 32 years old, and I have spent the last decade of my life doing exactly what you are supposed to do, working my fingers to the absolute bone. I am a fiercely independent, self-made woman who recently achieved her biggest milestone. After 10 grueling years of grinding, skipping holidays, eating dinner at my desk, and relentlessly climbing the corporate ladder at Stellaris Dynamics, a highly competitive global tech corporation, I finally reached the director level. The reward for my relentless ambition was closing on a gorgeous, detached villa nestled in the serene outskirts of the Texas Hill Country. This house was not merely a smart real estate investment. It was a physical manifestation of my blood, my sweat, my late nights, and my unwavering independence. Walking through the heavy, solid oak front doors, standing in the middle of the sprawling first floor with its massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rolling green hills, I finally felt an overwhelming sense of peace and security. That peace, however, was brutally short-lived. To truly understand the storm that was about to hit my sanctuary, you have to understand the stark, sickening contrast between me and my younger brother, Wyatt. Wyatt is 26 years old, but if you asked him to introduce himself at a party, he would proudly proclaim that he is a visionary startup entrepreneur and an aggressive venture capitalist. In reality, he is nothing more than a lazy, petty scam artist who has never held down a legitimate 9-to-5 job for more than 6 months. He constantly bounces from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. 2 years ago, it was a doomed cryptocurrency venture. Last year, it was a drop-shipping business selling counterfeit electronics. He leaves a massive trail of bankruptcies, ruined credit scores, and broken promises in his wake. And who always swoops in to clean up his disastrous financial messes? Our mother, Brenda. She is the absolute epitome of a blind enabler, constantly funding his delusional lifestyle while aggressively making excuses for his continuous pathetic failures. His latest venture was arguably his most absurd and destructive yet. Wyatt had decided he was going to revolutionize the health and wellness industry by selling a line of shady, unregulated dietary supplements sourced from dubious overseas suppliers. He poured money he absolutely did not have into flashy internet marketing, mountains of inventory he could not move, and a lavish lifestyle designed exclusively to make him look like a highly successful chief executive officer on social media. Of course, the business crashed and burned spectacularly within a matter of months. The supplements were exposed as worthless garbage, the angry creditors came knocking with threats of lawsuits, and Wyatt found himself utterly broke. To make matters significantly worse, he and his highly materialistic fiancée, Chloe, were just formally evicted from their luxury leased apartment in the city because they were drowning in tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Chloe is exactly the type of woman who expects the entire world handed to her on a silver platter without lifting a single finger, perfectly matching Wyatt's massive sense of unearned entitlement. I knew the inevitable fallout from his latest failure was coming. I just did not realize the blast radius was meant to include my new home. I was sitting on my back patio, enjoying a quiet Sunday evening with a glass of wine, when my phone rang. The caller ID read, Brenda. I took a deep, steadying breath and answered the call. "Peyton, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice dripping with that familiar, calculated sweetness she always used when she was about to ask for something wildly unreasonable. "How is the beautiful new house? It is so incredibly big for just one person." I instantly knew where this conversation was going. I braced myself. "It is perfectly sized for me, Mom. What do you need?" She sighed heavily into the receiver, perfectly playing the role of the exhausted, deeply concerned family matriarch. "It is your brother. You know he has had a string of terrible luck lately. The economic market just was not ready for his innovative supplement brand. He and Chloe had to leave their apartment today. They are practically homeless, Peyton. I need you to do the right Christian thing for your family. I want you to let them move into your house. Just give them the entire first floor. It is completely separate from your master suite. And it will only be for a few short months so Wyatt can get back on his feet and stabilize his finances." The sheer audacity of the request left me momentarily speechless. I had worked for over 10 years, sacrificing my social life, my mental health, and my sleep to afford this safe haven, and she wanted me to hand over half of it to a grown man who refused to work an honest day in his miserable life. "No, Mom," I said, my voice cold, sharp, and absolute. "Peyton, do not be so incredibly selfish," she snapped, the sweet facade instantly vanishing to reveal the demanding tone underneath. "You have all that extra space just sitting there empty. You are family. You owe it to him to help him out when he is down." "I do not owe him a single thing," I shot back, keeping my tone deadly calm to mask the fury boiling inside me. "Let us deal with actual facts. Wyatt does not have bad luck. Wyatt has a massive spending problem and a severe allergy to hard work. He leased a brand new sports car while his business was actively failing. He bought Chloe a designer handbag the exact same week they missed their rent payment. He is not a tragic victim, Mom. He is a parasite. And you are the host that keeps happily feeding him. I will not be his next meal ticket. My home is not a free halfway house for his endless bad decisions." "How dare you speak about your own flesh and blood that way?" she shrieked, her voice echoing harshly through the phone speaker. "If you do not open your doors to him right now, you are intentionally tearing this family apart." "Then consider it torn," I replied firmly. I ended the call without waiting for her response and placed my phone face down on the patio table. The serene silence of the Texas hill country returned, but it felt remarkably different now. It felt heavy and suffocating. I had drawn my absolute line in the sand, but knowing Wyatt, and knowing the extreme lengths my mother would go to blindly accommodate him, I knew this was not the end of the conversation. It was merely the quiet, tense calm before a devastating storm. I just had no idea how terrifyingly far they were willing to go to rip my hard-earned world apart. The following Tuesday began as a completely normal day at the corporate office. But the moment my tires hit the gravel of my driveway at exactly 6 in the evening, my blood turned to absolute ice. Parked aggressively across my freshly manicured front lawn was a massive 26-foot commercial moving truck. The heavy metal ramp was fully extended, crushing my rose bushes, and two burly men in sweat-stained gray shirts were actively hauling a battered velvet sofa out of the back. I slammed my car into park, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sprinted toward my front porch, my heels sinking into the grass, and that is when I saw the absolute most terrifying sight imaginable for a homeowner. A stranger in a blue utility jacket was kneeling at my front door, a heavy metallic drill pressed directly against my expensive brass lock mechanism. Standing right behind him, holding a massive iced coffee and wearing a disgustingly smug grin, was my brother Wyatt. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed, my voice tearing through the quiet suburban air. "Get away from my door right now!" The locksmith jumped, instinctively pulling his drill back, but Wyatt did not even flinch. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated entitlement. Relax, Peyton, Wyatt said, his voice dripping with condescension. We are just moving in. Like Mom said, it is only for a few months. You are not answering your phone, and the landlord cannot legally lock a paying tenant out of their own leased property. I am just exercising my rights. Landlord? Tenant? I stammered, completely blinded by the sheer audacity. I turned to the confused locksmith. I am the sole owner of this property. This man is trespassing. If you drill into that door, I will have you arrested for breaking and entering. The locksmith held up his hands defensively and looked at Wyatt. Look, buddy, you told me your crazy landlord's sister changed the locks on you illegally. I need to see the paperwork again. Without missing a single beat, Wyatt reached into his designer leather jacket and pulled out a crisp, neatly folded document. He handed it to the locksmith, and as I snatched it from the man's hands, my stomach violently dropped. It was a standard Texas residential lease agreement. It listed Wyatt and Chloe as the primary tenants for the entire first floor of my address. It stated a monthly rent of $0 in exchange for property maintenance, valid for 12 months. But the most horrifying part was at the very bottom of the page. There, in stark blue ink, was my signature. It was not a sloppy forgery. It was a perfect, terrifyingly accurate recreation of my personal signature, the exact one I used on my corporate emails and bank documents. This is completely fake, I yelled, waving the paper in Wyatt's face. I never signed this. You forged my signature, you absolute sociopath. Right on cue, as if waiting in the wings of a theatrical stage, Chloe emerged from the passenger side of the moving truck. She was not wearing her usual designer heels. Instead, she had dressed down in oversized sweatpants, her hair intentionally messy, wiping imaginary tears from her eyes. Why are you doing this to us, Peyton? Chloe wailed, her voice carrying an unnatural, piercing pitch designed specifically to travel. We just lost everything. We have no money, nowhere to sleep, and you are trying to throw your own family out onto the street. We have a legal contract. Doors began to open across the street. Curtains twitched. My new neighbors, people I had barely even introduced myself to yet, were stepping out onto their porches to witness the spectacle. Chloe fell to her knees on my driveway, burying her face in her hands, violently sobbing loud enough for the entire block to hear. She was weaponizing public shame, painting me as the cruel, heartless corporate monster actively destroying her destitute relatives. My hands were shaking with pure adrenaline, but my mind snapped into survival mode. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, reporting a break-in in progress. The wait felt like an eternity, but within 10 minutes, 2 local patrol cars arrived, their lights flashing and reflecting off the massive moving truck. The officers stepped out, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. I rushed forward, desperately trying to explain the situation, telling them my brother had forged a lease and hired a locksmith to break into my private sanctuary. But Wyatt was terrifyingly prepared. He calmly presented the forged lease agreement, his state identification card, and a piece of mail that he had somehow already forwarded to my address earlier that week. He spoke to the officers with a calm, respectful, and perfectly measured tone, claiming we had a verbal agreement that I was now maliciously trying to back out of simply because we had a family argument. The older officer, a tall man with a graying mustache, looked at the incredibly detailed lease and then looked at me with an expression of tired resignation. "Ma'am, this paperwork looks legitimate on its face," the officer said heavily. "He has a signed contract and established mail at this residence. Because he is claiming tenancy and possesses this document, this is no longer a criminal trespass issue. It is a civil matter. We cannot legally physically remove him from the premises tonight. You are going to have to take this to civil court and file for a formal legal eviction." "An eviction?" I gasped, feeling the oxygen leave my lungs. "He has never lived here. He just showed up 20 minutes ago. That piece of paper is a complete fabrication. Are you seriously telling me he can just forge a document and steal my house?" My hands are tied, ma'am, the officer replied, handing the fake lease back to Wyatt. If we throw him out and this lease turns out to be valid, the department gets sued for an illegal eviction. You need to let them move their items in, and you need to call a lawyer in the morning. Wyatt shot me a look of pure, triumphant evil. He turned to the movers and clapped his hands. All right, guys. The police said we are good to go. Let us get that sofa inside. A cold, sharp wave of absolute clarity suddenly washed over my panic. They thought they had trapped me using a piece of paper and bureaucratic red tape. They forgot they were dealing with a tech director whose house was entirely hardwired to her smartphone. Wait, I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, completely devoid of the panic from a moment ago. I opened my phone, swiping past the emergency dialer, and opened my proprietary smart home command application. With 3 rapid taps, I initiated the total lockdown protocol. Deep inside the walls of the house, heavy relays clicked. Every single light bulb in the massive villa shut off simultaneously. The digital thermostat immediately powered down, killing the central heating system. The electronic valves on the main water line clamped completely shut. I then accessed the county property tax portal, pulling up the master deed that clearly showed my name as the sole legal owner of the property, with no registered renters, and shoved the screen directly into the officer's face. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and lethal, "this is the official state record. I am the sole owner. Now, since this is a civil matter, you cannot force me to provide utilities to a disputed tenant. The house now has 0 electricity, 0 running water, and 0 heat. The smart locks are dead-bolted from the inside on an independent battery system. The locksmith cannot drill them without destroying a $5,000 door, which I will immediately press felony property damage charges for." I turned my gaze slowly to Wyatt, whose smug smile had instantly vanished. "If you want to live in the dark, without a toilet, without water, and freeze through the night, go right ahead and try to get inside," I told him. "But you cannot move a single piece of furniture through those doors today, because the doors will not open." The police officers exchanged a long, complicated look. The older officer finally turned to Wyatt. "She is right, son. We cannot force her to turn the power or water on. If you cannot get through the door without destroying property, you need to stop the move-in process immediately until a judge looks at this contract." Wyatt's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He realized his brilliant, flawless plan had just hit a massive, impenetrable digital wall. He aggressively paid off the confused movers, who unceremoniously dumped his cheap velvet sofa right in the middle of my front lawn before speeding off in their massive truck. But Wyatt and Chloe did not leave. Instead, a massive, rusted, 20-year-old recreational vehicle sputtered down the street and parked illegally right against the curb directly in front of my mailbox. They dragged their suitcases into the rotting vehicle, glaring at me through the dirty windshield. They were not leaving. The ambush had failed, but a suffocating, terrifying siege had just officially begun. The rusty recreational vehicle parked right against my curb was not just a neighborhood eyesore, it was a blatant declaration of psychological warfare. By Wednesday morning, the second phase of their attack began, orchestrated entirely by my mother, Brenda. Brenda immediately took the war online, launching a vicious, highly calculated smear campaign designed to completely destroy my reputation and force me into submission. She posted long, dramatic, tearful paragraphs on Facebook, intentionally tagging dozens of our extended relatives and family friends. The narrative she spun was an absolute masterpiece of manipulation. She publicly claimed that the intense corporate pressure at Stellaris Dynamics had finally caused me to suffer a severe mental breakdown. According to her wildly fabricated story, I had become a paranoid, heartless narcissist who was hallucinating threats and cruelly abandoning her own flesh and blood in their darkest hour of need. Within hours, my phone blew up with angry text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I had not spoken to in over 5 years. all demanding to know why I was forcing my poor little brother and his fiancée to sleep in a freezing vehicle on the street. The old me, the daughter who once desperately craved family approval, would have panicked and tried to publicly defend myself. The new me did absolutely nothing of the sort. I muted my notifications and kept my mouth completely shut. When you are dealing with professional victims, any emotional response you give is just fresh ammunition for their drama. I absolutely refused to play their game. Instead of fighting them on the internet, I fought them in the real world. My very first move was retaining one of the most aggressive, ruthlessly sharp real estate attorneys in the county. I paid him a hefty retainer of $10,000 to begin investigating and dismantling the forged lease agreement quietly behind the scenes. My second move was fortifying my physical and digital fortress. I called in a specialized private security firm and had them secretly upgrade every single exterior camera on the property. I did not just want standard high-definition video anymore. I requested military-grade lenses and highly sensitive directional audio microphones that could clearly capture a whisper from across the yard. I had the technicians reposition the angles so that I had full, overlapping digital coverage of the front gate, the sidewalk, and specifically, the rusted vehicle parked right outside my property line. If they wanted to lay an indefinite siege to my home, I was going to silently document every single breath they took. It did not take long for my costly investment to pay off in ways I never anticipated. While Wyatt and Chloe played the role of pitiful, helpless victims during the daylight hours, the night footage revealed a completely different, deeply sinister story. It was a Thursday night, right around 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting in my dark home office, nursing a cup of black coffee and watching the live feeds on my monitors. The suburban street was completely dead. Suddenly, a dark, heavy sedan with heavily tinted windows and absolutely no license plates rolled silently down the block. It stopped right next to the recreational vehicle. On the screen, Wyatt slipped out of the side door, looking frantically up and down the street. He jogged over to the passenger side of the unmarked car. The window rolled down just enough for a thick, unmarked brown package to be handed out. Wyatt grabbed it, shoved it deep under his jacket, and quickly retreated back into his vehicle. The dark sedan immediately sped off into the night. This exact bizarre transaction happened 2 more times over the next 3 days, always occurring between midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. Wyatt was not trying to break into my house just because he needed a free place to sleep. You do not receive sketchy midnight packages from unmarked cars if your only problem is being broke. There was a much darker, far more dangerous reason he was so incredibly desperate to get his legal name attached to my physical address. I immediately contacted a highly recommended private investigator, a former state financial crimes detective who specialized in forensic accounting and corporate fraud. I handed him the surveillance footage, the details of Wyatt's spectacularly failed supplement business, and another massive retainer fee. I told him to dig all the way to the absolute bottom of my brother's financial grave. Exactly 5 days later, the investigator requested a secure video call. He did not look happy. "Your brother is not just a bad businessman, Peyton," the investigator said, holding up a thick, red-tabbed physical file. "He is an absolute idiot who got into bed with some extremely dangerous people. That dietary supplement company he was constantly bragging about on social media? It was a massive financial sinkhole. Traditional banks completely cut him off over 6 months ago. So to keep his fake, lavish lifestyle afloat and buy more useless inventory, he went to the underground market." I felt a sickening, heavy knot form in my stomach. Who exactly did he borrow money from? A highly organized, incredibly violent loan shark syndicate operating out of the city, the investigator replied grimly. Wyatt is currently in debt for tens of thousands of dollars. The interest is compounding daily, and they are actively hunting him down. That is why he had to flee his luxury apartment so quickly. But here's the truly terrifying part, Peyton. He does not have the actual cash to pay them back, so he offered them a different kind of service to save his own life. The investigator paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence fill the digital space between us. Your brother forged that lease because he desperately needed a pristine, high-value residential address with absolutely zero criminal history attached to it. He was planning to use your new home as a registered front to receive illicit funds and set up fraudulent shell corporations. He was going to use your house to physically launder dirty money for the syndicate to pay off his massive debt. I sat perfectly still, staring blankly at the screen. The sheer, devastating magnitude of his betrayal washed over me. Wyatt was not just trying to steal my peace or live rent-free. He was actively trying to drag my clean, hard-earned name into a federal crime syndicate. If the police or the Federal Bureau of Investigation had raided my house while he was running that operation, I would have lost my entire career, my property, and potentially my freedom. He was fully willing to sacrifice my entire life just to save his own miserable skin, and my mother was aggressively defending a criminal. The initial shock slowly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, calculated, and absolute fury. Wyatt thought he was playing a clever game of survival. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to utterly destroy him. While I was silently building an ironclad case against his criminal enterprise, Wyatt decided it was time to escalate his petty, vindictive war. Since he could not physically breach my home, he decided to attack the very foundation of my independence, my career. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the initial moving truck incident, the head of human resources at Stellaris Dynamics requested my immediate presence in her office. She slid a printed email across her polished mahogany desk. It was sent from a highly encrypted, anonymous address, but the desperate, chaotic writing style, complete with his signature grammatical errors, was unmistakably my brother. The email outlined a completely fabricated, highly detailed narrative accusing me of grossly misusing corporate funds, stealing proprietary technology, and using company servers to conduct illegal personal business. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to get me immediately terminated and ruin my professional credibility forever. What the absolute idiot did not realize was that I had spent 10 years building an impeccable reputation, and I do not leave blind spots in my defense. The very morning after the police left my driveway, I had proactively scheduled a private meeting with the board of directors and the legal department. I had laid out the entire situation regarding my brother, his forged lease, and his escalating harassment, providing them with the initial police report to keep everything completely transparent. So instead of handing me a termination letter, the human resources director and I simply laughed. My company possesses a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity infrastructure. Our internal team effortlessly traced the Internet Protocol address of the anonymous email directly back to the wireless network of the rusty recreational vehicle parked on my curb. Wyatt had just handed me documented, indisputable federal evidence of malicious corporate sabotage and cyber harassment. The noose was steadily tightening, and he was the one eagerly pulling the rope. But the final, fatal piece of the puzzle arrived via a secure courier 3 days later. It was a second, much thicker physical file from my private investigator. I locked myself in my home office, poured a glass of cold water, and began reading. I honestly thought the money laundering revelation was the absolute bottom of Wyatt's depravity, but I was completely wrong. There is a special circle of hell reserved for what he had done to our mother. The financial forensics revealed that the violent loan sharks were not the only people Wyatt had defrauded to keep his pathetic, fake lifestyle afloat. He had secretly accessed Brenda's personal banking details. Over the course of the last 8 months, he had systematically drained her entire retirement savings account, wiping out 35 years of her hard work. But that was not all. Using a forged power of attorney document, Wyatt had taken out a massive, high-interest second mortgage on our mother's fully paid-off suburban home. He had literally gambled away her entire future, her shelter, and her security. just to pay down his underground debts. The documents in the file showed that the bank was already preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings because Wyatt had not made a single payment in over 90 days. Brenda was completely oblivious to all of this. She was spending her days aggressively defending him on the internet, blindly attacking me, completely unaware that the golden child she was protecting had already sold her house right out from under her. I held the absolute destruction of my family right in my hands. A single phone call to Brenda would have shattered her world instantly. But I stood up and looked out my window at the rusted vehicle on my curb. I thought about the vicious smear campaign, the forged lease, the lies to the police, and the sheer entitlement they had all displayed. If I told her the truth right now, she would somehow find a way to blame me. She would justify his criminal actions and beg me to bail them out financially. No. They needed to burn in the fire they had so carelessly started. I decided to maintain absolute total silence. I ignored their text messages. I ignored the angry phone calls from relatives, and I simply went to work every single day, walking past their vehicle as if it was completely invisible. My utter lack of reaction drove Wyatt absolutely insane, but it also made him incredibly arrogant. He mistook my strategic silence for weakness and fear. Believing I was on the very verge of breaking, he fired his final fatal shot. On a Friday afternoon, a professional process server walked up my driveway and handed me a thick legal envelope. It was a formal, aggressive demand letter from a sleazy, high-priced civil litigation attorney. An attorney whose $5,000 retainer, I knew for an absolute fact, had been paid directly by Brenda. The letter was a masterpiece of delusional extortion. My client demands that you immediately vacate the premises, surrender the property keys, and provide a lump sum payment of $50,000 for the severe mental and emotional distress you have intentionally caused, the document read. If I did not formally comply within 48 hours, they threatened to file a massive civil lawsuit to publicly destroy me and seize my assets. I read the ridiculous demands, gently placed the letter on my marble kitchen counter, and smiled for the very first time in weeks. The trap was perfectly set. Wyatt was blind with greed, Brenda was blind with enabling love, and Chloe was just blind. It was time to invite the rats inside for dinner. The following Wednesday morning at exactly 10 o'clock, I walked into the sprawling downtown office of my real estate attorney, Mr. Sterling. The conference room was designed for absolute psychological warfare. It was freezing cold, enclosed in thick soundproof glass, and dominated by a massive, imposing black marble table. Sitting across from me, looking entirely too comfortable in my territory, was the opposition. Wyatt wore a cheap, flashy suit that clearly did not fit him. Chloe sat next to him, aggressively chewing gum and glaring at me as if I was dirt on her shoe. My mother, Brenda, was dressed in her conservative Sunday best, holding a tissue and looking perfectly prepared to play the tragic, heartbroken peacemaker. Next to them sat their attorney, a greasy-looking man who reeked of cheap cologne and desperation. Mr. Sterling, impeccably dressed and radiating cold professionalism, sat down beside me. He placed a sleek silver digital audio recorder directly in the center of the marble table. He pressed a button, a small red light illuminated, and he formally stated the date, the time, and the names of every single person present in the room. He then clearly asked if all parties explicitly consented to the audio recording of this mediation for formal legal purposes. Their greasy lawyer nodded, and Wyatt eagerly chimed in with a loud, confident yes, clearly believing this recording was going to document my humiliating forced surrender. The trap was officially armed. Now, all I had to do was guide the rat toward the cheese. Brenda opened the negotiation, dabbing her completely dry eyes with her tissue. Peyton, darling, I am so incredibly glad you finally came to your senses and agreed to meet with us. This whole silly feud has just gone entirely too far. The entire family is so deeply upset with how you have been behaving. We are blood. We are supposed to love and protect each other through thick and thin. She paused, looking at me with an expression she probably thought was maternal, but was actually dripping with toxic manipulation. Your brother is going through a very tough transition, Brenda continued, her voice taking on a pleading, theatrical tone. He just needs a little bit of grace. I am asking you, as your mother, to please just put your massive ego aside. Drop all this unnecessary hostility. All he is asking for is the first floor of your gigantic house. It is totally empty anyway. Just let them move their things in, drop these ridiculous threats, and pay the $50,000 his lawyer asked for to cover the horrible emotional damage you caused by locking them out in the freezing cold. I kept my face completely blank, staring at her for a long, heavy moment. Then, I let out a long, shaky sigh. I slumped my shoulders forward, just a fraction of an inch, dropping my gaze to my hands resting on the table. I perfectly mimicked the body language of a woman who was completely exhausted, beaten down by the pressure, and ready to wave the white flag. I just wanted a peaceful home, I said quietly, letting my voice waver slightly for dramatic effect. I have been so incredibly stressed at work. Having that moving truck show up out of nowhere just completely panicked me. I did not want things to escalate to the police or lawyers. Wyatt leaned back in his leather chair, a massive, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He crossed his arms behind his head, practically radiating smug satisfaction. He thought he had completely broken me. He thought the heavy pressure from the extended family and the terrifying threat of a massive civil lawsuit had finally crushed my spirit. "Well, you definitely overreacted, Peyton," Wyatt scoffed, his tone dripping with absolute arrogance. "But I am a very forgiving guy. If you hand over the front door keys today and cut the check by Friday afternoon, Chloe and I will generously agree not to ruin your life in a public courtroom. We will just move in quietly, and we can all go back to being a happy family." "I am willing to discuss the living arrangement," I said softly, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "But I just need to understand exactly where we stand legally. If I agree to let you move in today, what exactly happens to that lease document you showed the police officers on my driveway? Because if we are starting over, I do not want that document hanging over my head." Their greasy lawyer leaned forward, sensing a slight trap, and opened his mouth to speak. "My client is willing to void the existing lease agreement upon the signing of a new agreement but I immediately cut him off, keeping my eyes locked entirely on Wyatt. "No, I need to hear it directly from Wyatt. I need to know how you even got that document in the first place, Wyatt. It really messed with my head. I know I never signed it, but the signature looked so incredibly real. Did you somehow trick my leasing office into generating it? Because if there is a security breach at my property management company, I need to know before I let anyone move in." This was the precise, lethal psychological pivot. I was intentionally appealing to his massive, fragile ego. I was giving him the opportunity to brag, to show off exactly how he had outsmarted his highly successful corporate director sister. Wyatt, completely blinded by his own narcissism and completely ignoring the frantic hand gestures of his own attorney, leaned forward, eager to claim his twisted victory. "There is no property management company, you absolute idiot," Wyatt laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed loudly in the soundproof room. "You actually thought some corporation did that? I did it myself. I downloaded a standard state rental template from the internet. It took me maybe 15 minutes. But my signature," I pressed gently, my voice barely above a whisper, encouraging him to keep digging his own grave. "It looked exactly like my handwriting. How did you possibly manage to fake it so perfectly to trick those 2 police officers?" "Fake it?" Wyatt sneered, slamming his hand down on the marble table for emphasis. "I did not just fake it, Peyton. I traced it perfectly. Remember that birthday card you sent Mom 2 years ago? The one with the massive, showy signature at the bottom? I scanned it, printed it out, and physically traced your exact signature directly onto the bottom of the lease agreement using a blue ink pen. The cops bought it completely hook, line, and sinker because I am just that much smarter than you. You thought your little smart home lock was going to keep me out, but my brain completely beat your pathetic security system. The entire room went dead silent. Chloe grinned, completely oblivious. Brenda looked slightly uncomfortable but said absolutely nothing. Their lawyer, however, had turned the color of old chalk. He slowly put his pen down, realizing with absolute horror that his client had just aggressively, loudly, and proudly confessed to felony forgery and uttering a false document directly into a legally admissible recording device. I dropped the act immediately. The fake exhaustion vanished from my posture. I sat up perfectly straight, my spine stiff, and looked directly into Wyatt's eyes. The soft, vulnerable expression on my face was replaced by a cold, lethal glare. Mr. Sterling calmly reached out his perfectly manicured hand and pressed the button on the silver voice recorder. The little red light blinked off. Then, with a loud, incredibly satisfying noise, Mr. Sterling slammed his heavy leather case file completely shut. "Thank you very much for your time and your remarkable candor today," Mr. Sterling said, his voice as smooth and sharp as a surgical scalpel. I stood up from my chair, smoothing out the front of my blazer. I looked down at the confused, arrogant face of my brother. "This mediation is officially concluded," I stated firmly, my voice devoid of any emotion. Wyatt blinked, his smug smile faltering slightly, as he looked between me and his totally paralyzed lawyer. "Wait, what do you mean it is concluded? We have not signed the new agreement yet. What time are you giving me the keys to the house tomorrow?" I grabbed my purse from the back of the chair and gave him a slow, chilling smile. "You do not need to worry about the keys, Wyatt. Just make sure you stay right there in your recreational vehicle on the curb. Someone will be coming to pick you up very soon." Without waiting for another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the freezing conference room, leaving them utterly confused in the heavy silence. They had absolutely no idea that the trap had not just closed, it had completely shattered their entire world. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, my security system chimed softly. I checked the live feed from my tablet. Standing aggressively at the very edge of my driveway, right in front of the heavy iron security gates, was the trio. Wyatt was wearing the exact same smug, victorious expression he had paraded around the mediation room yesterday. Chloe stood beside him, clutching an empty designer tote bag, already looking at my house as if she owned it. My mother, Brenda, stood slightly in front of them, her posture radiating self-righteous vindication. They honestly believed I was coming out to hand over the keys and a $50,000 settlement check. I unlocked the front door and walked slowly down the paved driveway. The cool morning air felt incredibly crisp and clean. I was empty-handed, except for the thick, red-tabbed physical file my private investigator had delivered days prior. "Well, it is about time," Wyatt called out loudly as I approached the gate. He crossed his arms over his chest. "Open the gate, Peyton, and I hope you brought the cashier's check. Otherwise, my lawyer is filing the lawsuit before noon." "Peyton, just hand over the keys so we can finally put this ugly chapter behind us," Brenda added, using her sickly sweet maternal voice. "We can all just heal and move on as a family." I did not press the button to open the iron gate. I walked right up to the metal bars, looked directly into my mother's expectant eyes, and shoved the heavy investigator's file through the gap. Brenda reflexively caught it against her chest. "I do not have your keys, Wyatt," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on Brenda. "Mom, you need to open that folder and read the very first page. Right now." Brenda looked confused, glancing down at the unmarked folder, then over at Wyatt. Wyatt's smug smile instantly vanished. He recognized the shape and weight of a financial dossier. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly pale white. "Do not read that, Mom," Wyatt stammered, suddenly reaching out to grab the folder from her hands. "She is just playing mind games. Give it to me." But Brenda had already flipped open the heavy cardboard cover. Her eyes scanned the top document. It was the official foreclosure notice from her bank, explicitly detailing the 90 days of missed payments on her second mortgage. Beneath that was the heavily highlighted ledger showing the complete, systematic draining of her retirement funds. I watched the exact moment the illusion of her perfect golden child violently shattered. Brenda's hands began to shake uncontrollably. The papers violently rustled in the quiet morning breeze. Her breath hitched in her throat, transforming into a horrifying, suffocated gasp. "Wyatt?" Brenda whispered, her voice cracking as she stared at the undeniable banking seals and the forged power of attorney bearing his signature. "My house, my retirement. You took everything? You took my entire life?" "Mom, I can explain. It was just a temporary loan," Wyatt panicked, stepping backward toward the curb. "I was going to pay it all back as soon as I got the house." But there was no time for his pathetic lies. The low, distant wail of heavy sirens suddenly pierced the quiet suburban air. Within seconds, the sound morphed into a deafening roar. Two massive black sport utility vehicles with flashing red and blue lights violently swerved around the corner, instantly blocking in the rusted recreational vehicle. Right behind them, 3 local police cruisers screeched to a halt, completely shutting down the entire street. This was not a civil dispute anymore. The meticulously documented audio confession of felony forgery, combined with the extensive financial evidence of credit fraud and the active money laundering operation I had handed over to my corporate legal team, had triggered a massive federal response. Doors flew open. Heavily armed agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Marshal Service swarmed the lawn. "Wyatt Knight, get on the ground right now. Hands behind your back," a federal agent roared, drawing his weapon. Wyatt froze in absolute terror before dropping to his knees. 2 agents immediately tackled him face first into the freshly cut grass of the very lawn he had so desperately tried to steal. The metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoed sharply. Chloe took one horrified look at the federal agents pinning her fiancé to the dirt. She did not scream. She did not try to help him. She simply hitched her designer bag higher on her shoulder, turned on her heel, and literally sprinted in the opposite direction down the sidewalk, abandoning him without a single backward glance. Brenda collapsed onto the concrete driveway, clutching the financial documents to her chest, wailing in a pitch of pure, agonizing grief. Her golden boy was being hauled to a federal transport vehicle, and she was going home to an empty, foreclosed house. I stood behind the cold, solid iron bars of my gate and watched the absolute destruction of the parasites who had tried to consume me. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no guilt. I turned my back on the screaming, the flashing lights, and the chaos. I walked up the driveway and stepped inside my beautiful, quiet home. I pulled out my phone and tapped the smart home application. The heavy iron gates slowly rolled completely shut, locking into place with a definitive, satisfying clank, entirely cutting off the noise of the outside world. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a generous glass of rich red wine, and took a deep, relaxing breath. The house was perfectly silent. It was the absolute, beautiful sound of ultimate freedom and boundaries that would never, ever be broken again. Thank you so much to all the amazing listeners of Vivian Revenge Stories for tuning in today. Where are you listening to this story from? Please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, please consider helping us with just $1. You can support our channel by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by using the PayPal link located in the description or the pinned comment section. Your generosity allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can feed their families and continue creating even better stories for you. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.